Hey guys, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to part 7 of my pop EDM production series in Logic Pro 10. In the last video, we finished up most of the mixing and sound design for the intro. Now we're going to move on to the verses. In this video, we're going to start with the sound design for the synths, the bass, and the kick drum. We're going to create a sidechain pumping or ducking effect in the bass, as well as add the arpeggiator on the two synthesizers, and do a bit of sound design for those as well. Just remember, if you'd like to work along with me, this full multi-track session is available for download and purchase. I'll make sure to put a link in the video description below. So let's get into this. So let's start at the verse here. And just because we're not going to be working with the vocals today, I'm going to mute those out. We'll get to that in the next video. Let's start with the kick drum and the sub bass, and we renamed that sub bass pumping earlier because we're going to create sort of a pumping, ducking sidechain effect with this. So with the kick drum, the first thing I want to do with it is just pull it down a little bit. It's at negative 0.7. Let's pull that down to about negative 0.2 or so, just to give us a little bit of headroom on the master fader. Sounds good. And then let's throw that in with the the sub bass pumping track. I want to get rid of some of the high frequencies there. I really want this to sound like a sub bass. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the channel EQ, but I'm actually going to add this on the second slot of our audio effects because we're going to actually put a compressor for the pumping effect before the EQ. So let's choose our channel EQ effect here. And we're going to pull in our low pass filter. And I'm just going to type this in right here. Roughly about 6400 hertz is where I had it before. So it just sort of cuts out some of the extreme high end and leaves some more of like the mid range and the low end in there. The next thing we're going to do is before the EQ, we're going to add the compressor plugin. So we'll go under Dynamics, Compressor Stereo. I'm going to use the digital, Platinum Digital for this. But what we're going to do is we're not really going to compress the bass just by itself. We're going to create a sidechain pumping or ducking effect. So essentially what this does is you can sidechain an external source. And in our case, the external source is the kick drum. So what we're going to do is essentially feed the compressor the signal from the kick drum into the compressor. And every single time the kick hits, the compressor is going to compress more. And the way you do that, and this is a very common stereotypical technique that's done in electronic music, especially with bass lines, is you go up to the sidechain input here, and you choose that track that you want to use as the sidechain source. So in our case, it's the kick track. So we're going to go down to kick. There it is. And we choose sidechain kick, or excuse me, kick audio 21 as our sidechain source. And now what we can do is we can roll down the threshold, pull up the compression ratio. I'm going to set the auto gain to off. I don't like using the auto gain function. I'm going to turn off the auto release. I'm going to pull the attack time down, release time down. The knee can stay where it's at. And watch what happens. Without the sidechain, we just have just regular old compression on the track. You can see the volume is coming down quite a bit. But when we use the sidechain source, let's go ahead and throw that back in, the kick. You can see that the volume of the kick is affecting the volume of the sidechain pumping effect of the bass line. So let's go ahead and pull up the makeup gain because I want the bass to stand out against the kick drum. And if you want this to be even more drastic of an effect, you can pull down the threshold more and pull up the ratio more. And you can also play around with the attack and release time to control how quickly the kick drum affects the bass and how quickly it releases the bass. So let's try it right here. another thing what we can do is we can go into the sidechain option here, and we can filter the sidechain detection. Right now, it's basically it's using the entire sum of the entire signal. What I want to do is say filter on, and we're just gonna use the high frequencies. So we're gonna say high pass the signal. And what this means is that just the frequencies around a certain or above a certain frequency are going to affect the sidechain input, because I feel like a lot of the low end is affecting the sidechain pumping effect and making it not kind of come in as quickly as it could. So I'm going to turn on the high pass mode, turn on filter on, and then filter this. And I'm going to play around with the filter frequency and find where a good spot is. So let's let me just click on this. I'm going to hit U to set my my cycle mode around that area. And then actually, let's go right here and hit U. There we go. And I'm just going to sort of loop this and listen to what it sounds like. Yeah, so for us, I'm using 196 hertz as the frequency. You can hear it. It just the pumping effect happens a lot quicker than it did when I used the low, just all the those low frequencies in there too. So so let's go about 196, and let's give that a listen with all of the other instruments in other than the vocals. So these other two synths are pretty boring sounding. Let's add some cool sound design to them. The first thing we're going to do is on the retro synth, we're going to pan it over to the left, and we're going to pan the 80s air pad over to the right. So the way we're going to do this is one of the new features in Logic 10.3 is you can right click on your pan knobs and choose stereo pan as opposed to balance. And this allows you, essentially allows you the same sort of freedom that you had with the direction mixer that I used in a previous mixing series to just have a better stereo balance and have better positioning. So I'm gonna set this to about 25 to the left, and then this one's gonna go about 25 to the right. So I'm just gonna, whoops, right click on that, go to stereo pan, and then move that over to about 25 to the right. So we've got these two synth ideas panned left and right. Let's just solo those out for now. Very boring, just whole notes basically. So let's start with the 80s air pad first. With this track, we are going to add the arpeggiator. So I'm going to go up to the MIDI effects here, click on that, and go down to arpeggiator. And in this, we're going to basically just use the stock setting, and we're going to pull the rate down to an 1/8 note. We're going to change the direction to down rather than up. And then we're also going to go with variation 1, but we're going to change the octave to octave range 2. And let's see what that sounds like. So it's a little more interesting, but I still want to give this a little bit more ambience. So let's add Space Designer to this right on the track. So I'm going to go to my audio effects, go down to reverb, go to Space Designer. And let's try out some different settings. Let's try out first under large spaces, plate reverbs, shimmering plate. Let's try that. Let's pull the reverb amount up quite a bit. Yeah, it's not quite as rich of a reverb as I'd like. Let's try something else. Let's go under big plate. Let's try that one. There we go. So I used the big plate. I pulled the dry back a bit, the reverb up a bit, went under the EQ and boosted the 200 or 2000 hertz band up a bit just to make it a bit brighter sounding. So the last thing we're going to do to our 80s air pad is we're going to add the same sidechain ducking or pumping effect that we did on the sub bass. On the 80s air pad, after the Space Designer, we're going to add the compressor plugin. I'm probably not going to use the sidechain filter this time. So let's go ahead and choose the sidechain source as the kick drum, because we want our synth here to kind of have that same ducking, pumping effect as the kick drum. Let's try all of those in except for the retro synth. Let's see what all that sounds like. Cool. Now you'll notice that after I press stop, the volume sort of swells back in and the compressor lets go. We'll fix that in the next video, but we'll basically, there's several instruments that are going to be affected by the sidechain pumping effect that we're going to have to go in and do some automation. So we'll handle that in either the next video or the video after that. All right, so let's move on to the retro synth here. With the retro synth, we are going to add the arpeggiator as well. So we'll go up to our MIDI effects here, add the arpeggiator. We're just going to use a preset here. The one I used is the Groovy Cycle 09. Let's see what that sounds like. Cool. I want to create some sort of like stereo motion with this. So I'm going to use the tremolo plugin. So we're going to go to our audio effects, go down to modulation, and then go down to tremolo and choose stereo. And the tremolo is essentially a stereo tremolo plugin. It sort of pulses the signal in stereo. You can actually use this to sort of simulate the same sidechain pumping effect that we're getting from the kick drum and the retro, or in the 80s AirPad and the sub bass. But I find that I just don't like it as much for that sort of thing, so we're not using it for that. For this, we're gonna go with a quarter note the way it is, depth at 100, smoothing at 100, and then the phase for the left to right channel at 180. So basically the stock setting. So let's see what that sounds like. And if this was in full stereo and not panned. So we're taking away a little bit of that width, and we're pushing it over into the left speaker, which is just fine. The last thing I'm going to do to the retro synth is add the stereo delay to it. So I'm going to go under my bottom effects plugin here, go down to delay, go to stereo delay. And for this, we are going to go with a quarter note in the left channel, an eighth note in the right channel, just as is. We're going to filter this out so that we mostly just have mid-range. So I'm going to pull down the high end and then pull up the whole thing. And then what we're going to do is the feedback's going to stay at 35, and the output mix is going to stay at 30% for both channels. And then both of these in at the same time. Cool, so let's listen to this whole thing, the whole verse, with the kick, the pumping effect and the sub bass, the pumping effect and the arpeggiator and the AirPad, as well as the arpeggiator and the retro synth. And there you go. So it should sound the same in the second verse as well, since the material over there, other than the vocals, is identical to the first verse. All right, so that's all the time I have for this video. In the next video, we will move on to working with the vocals in the verse. We will use flex time to time align them to the grid. There's actually, like I said, there's 2 vocals, they're doubled up. We're actually going to cut these up into some different tracks, and then what we'll do is we'll apply flex pitch to them and create some artificial harmonies as well. So that'll all happen in the next couple videos. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.